Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull appeared on the ABC last night, and in an all too predictable performance in front of his home crowd, he talked up the climate change issue without, I might add, explaining how on earth Australia was going to change the global climate, and he attacked his own party, the Liberal Party, the Coalition. Now, Turnbull said our fires are hotter and there are more of them now because of climate change, even though, of course, there's no evidence to support those claims. To illustrate his point, he spoke of the horrors he saw in Victoria 10 years ago after the Black Saturday bushfires in an emotive reference to burnt-out cars.
The aluminium in the wheels had melted and was left run out on the ground. That is what our firefighters and our communities in rural areas and areas around our cities are facing. And so we have to recognise this is a national security issue. I mean, when Australians' lives are at risk, when they are being threatened, when their families and their homes and their crops and their properties and everything they hold dear is being put at threat, that's a national security issue. If it isn't a national security issue, what is? And it requires a national response.
The national government to deal with.
The national government has to provide leadership.
Well, yes, they were terrible fires in 2009. 173 people were killed, and as tragic as the current fires are, they put those New South Wales fires, the current New South Wales fires, deep into the shade. And when you see this sort of incident and the aftermath up close, it is obviously horrific. I saw the same in 1983 in the Adelaide Hills. Cars melted into Green Hill Road where people had been burned to death. That was 36 years ago, long before our politicians talked about global warming. And the horrific fires that hit especially in South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania in the 1960s and in the 1930s were absolutely horrific. Infernos, maelstroms, unstoppable. Let's not diminish the victims of the past and the firefighters of the past by playing this game, by pretending the horrible threat of bushfires now is worse. It's always been horrendous, and it always will be in this country. The measures to fight and prevent fires have not changed except for improvements such as protective equipment and firebombing aircraft. But you can't blame climate change when the drought has been the problem in New South Wales right now, and the leading scientific experts say you can't directly link this drought to climate change. That's not my opinion, that's the expert analysis.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid. And if you look at the Bureau of Meteorology data over the whole of the last 100 years, there's no trend in data. There is no drying trend. There's been a drying trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no drying trend in the last 100 years, and that's an expression of how variable the Australian rainfall climate is.
As you know, Professor Pittman says he should have said no direct link in that presentation, otherwise he stands by all those facts and all that reasoning. The point here is that we surely have had enough of this insulting and sickening pretense that emissions reductions policies in Australia can protect us from bushfires. It doesn't make sense scientifically or factually. It defies logic and sound reasoning. So it diminishes anyone who promotes it, because it exposes them as playing politics and using emotion to override rational arguments. And so let me turn to politics. Turnbull is understandably bitter about losing the Prime Ministership, the second time he lost the Liberal leadership by trying to do a deal with Labor over climate policy.
The Coalition has a fundamental problem in dealing with climate change because there is a group within the Liberal parties and the National parties who deny the reality of climate change and will oppose to the point of essentially blowing up a government, my government in this case, if there is action taken to reduce emissions.
The political point here, the political lesson for Turnbull, should he ever want to get involved in politics again, unlikely I know, is that if he ever attacked Labor, with the conviction, consistency and cut-through he showed there against his own side, he would have won the 2016 election in a landslide and might still be Prime Minister today.